So there are three basic agreements we work with in the federal aid program. The Master Agreement, Program Supplement, and the E76 Authorization. These agreements establish the responsibilities of the local agency and eligibility for reimbursement. No agreement, no reimbursement. The Master Agreement establishes and defines the general terms and conditions that must be met to receive federal aid or state funds. There is only one master agreement per agency. That is, there is one master agreement for federal aid projects, but there is a separate master agreement for state-funded projects. This agreement is between the local agencies and Caltrans. The master agreement stipulates that a local agency will follow all state statutes and procedures, including those set forth in the LAPM, LAPG, along with all the E76 procedures. So I talk about state regulations, state statutes, also federal requirements. Also includes invoicing requirements, record retention, timely use of funds, the use of allows the use of consultants, and maintaining the project upon completion. In most cases, there is already an executed master agreement for your agency. Only when a new agency comes on board do we need to execute a master agreement. The program supplement is a supplement to the master agreement, and it is project specific. It defines project location, scope of work, types and amounts of federal funds, state and local funds used to finance the local project. It is the basis for Caltrans to reimburse a local agency for work done. This agreement is also between the local agency and Caltrans and contains covenants that serve as reminders to ensure that the local agency follows federal procedures. A finance letter is part of the PSA, and it is a financial summary. The PSA is not usually updated with authorization of additional federal funds, whether for a new phase or for cost increases. The finance letter serves as the document for controlling these increases or changes. The finance letter also includes accounting encumbrance information that is critical for invoicing. The E76 agreement is between FHWA and Caltrans, and it acknowledges the authorization and obligation of federal funds for a specific project. It is these three agreements that allow money to flow from FHWA to the local agency. So your project has been programmed. It is now time to start utilizing federal funds, and an authorization is required. The question of why is there an authorization process can be answered as follows. The Federal Highway Administration has the authority and responsibility for implementing and monitoring federal laws, regulations, and executive orders affecting federal transportation programs. When a project involves federal funding, FHW is involved according to these responsibilities and delegates to Caltrans accordingly per the Caltrans FHWA Stewardship and Oversight Agreement. In California, we refer to this process as the E76 process, or simply as authorization. Authorization is FHWA's permission to begin with a phase of work and to be eligible for reimbursement. These phases of work are specific. A separate request is required for PE, right-of-way, which may include utilities, and construction, which may also include construction engineering. The date FHWA approves the authorization establishes the date of reimbursement. A project is not eligible for reimbursement until the authorization has occurred. Work that occurs prior to the authorization is not eligible for reimbursement except for at-risk PE. And we'll be discussing at-risk PE in a little bit. Important for construction, you must have authorization before you advertise. Again, I'll repeat this. You must have authorization before advertising. Failure to receive construction authorization before you advertise is a critical procedural error and has made construction federally ineligible. It comes if you advertise your project before you get the authorization, you've made the project ineligible. When do you seek an authorization? Make sure the request is not too soon or too late. Too late means you have missed out on possible reimbursement for work that has occurred prior to authorization. And again, for construction, you may have made the project ineligible for federal funding. If it's too early, if you fail to begin work, the project may become inactive, and we'll be talking about inactivity this afternoon. I think Susie mentioned this form this morning about an authorization report. So the E76 authorization agreement is a Caltrans generated report that acknowledges FHWA approval of a local agency's authorization request. The report includes the authorization date by FHWA. This is the official approval by FHWA, and an agency may begin reimbursable work. In this example, FHWA authorized the work on December 12th, 2023, or actually December 26th, in 2023. Reimbursable work may begin as early as the next day, really the 27th. And remember, do not advertise the construction contract prior to authorization. This diagram is an overall view of the federal aid process, broken down by the various components and phases along which chapter of the LAPM covers a particular topic. And so we kind of refer to this as we go through the overall, when we talk about the overall federal aid process, this chart is actually used quite readily through all the different courses. So the request for authorization must be processed before starting reimbursable work. And again, a separate request is required for each phase of work. And an agency must have on file with Caltrans the Exhibit 9A, which is the DBE implementation agreement for local agencies to acknowledge the local agency's commitment to implementing a DBE program. They must have the 9B, which is the annual submittal form, which designates a DBE liaison officer, a detail of all planned race-neutral measures, and monitor and enforcement mechanisms to ensure subcontractors, including DBEs, are promptly paid. In Exhibit 9C, the local agency ADA annual submittal form must be on file, which designates an ADA liaison officer and ensures ADA compliance for all projects. The master agreement must be executed, or the agency has been approved for federal aid work, and the master agreement will actually be executed with the program supplement after authorization. The request for authorization is prepared by the local agency. It must include the LAPM 3A, the project authorization adjustment request, with supporting documentation. And again, remember to obtain authorization before advertising a construction project. You can see I'm emphasizing this point quite regularly because it's a question that comes up about this. But again, there are fatal flaws that exist in the federal aid process. And this is a easy one that people could actually make a mistake on. And so it's important to know, authorize before you advertise.
And Peter, there's a question in the chat just to emphasize this. Can you please clarify what is the E76 authorization date? Is it the email we receive from Caltrans local assistance? And so maybe just re-emphasizing where that date is.
Went back to the slide. So this, now the DLAs for the 12 different districts might do things a little bit different. So you can clarify, but I believe you send this report, copy of this report, this print of this page to the agencies after authorization. So look at a copy of this, and I say, pointing out, it has right there, E76 authorized date in FEMAS, and it has the FHWA person who approved it. And that date there on the right establishes the date of authorization. So if a district does not send this, then most likely will send some kind of a letter to you, and they will report this same date. And this date is, like I said, generated from when FHWA does the formal approval.
Correct. So it's not the date from the email that you may have received, but the date that's on the E76 authorization PDF. And then another question that's in there, is there a separate E76 authorization for each project phase? And that's yes. You put in a separate request to say, I'm now ready, I'm done with PE, I'm now ready to do right away. And you put in a request, you'll get a separate E76 authorization to start right away. And there's, work that you shouldn't do in right away until you have authorization, especially like Peter was saying for construction.
Okay. Are questions all answered for now? Yeah, go back to where we were. So when submitting a request for authorization, the LAPM 3A is the primary document. This table identifies the typical supporting document by phase required to be submitted. And we'll be talking about each one of these phases. So if you're asking for PE, they're going to have the 3A and they're going to have the FTIP. FTIP pretty much required for all of these initial authorizations. The black dots, as it shows, required if applicable. So we have the 12F, cost-effective public interest finding. That is required if you're doing any deviation from the normal standard federal procedures. In the PE phase, if you're hiring consultants, there are federal procedures that are required for bringing a consultant on board. If you deviate from those in any such a way, and you still want to be federally eligible, you'd have to get this approval. And same thing with DBE. If you are utilizing consultants and you are establishing a DBE goal, you would submit this for helping establish. And under construction, it's absolutely expected to have a DBE goal. Therefore, that is a required document. I'm going to run through an exercise of preparing a PE authorization. So we're going to go through all the steps that we would expect a local agency to do. It's a very simple project. So we have a local pavement rehabilitation project. It is on D Street from East North Avenue to East College. So we have a kind of a map here to show the project. This project is going to be federally funded. It is programmed in the FTIP for both PE and construction. And as part of the documentation for this exercise, I'll be showing you the FTIP and the functional classification map. And like I said, I'm going to walk you through the process of completing the 3A. So again, going through the support documentation, the documentation that's to be submitted along with the 3A, we would have the FTIP as a minimum. Again, the 12F, the cost-effective public interest finding is required if any deviation from standard federal procedures. The 9D, if utilizing consultants. For the purpose of this exercise, the local agency staff will be doing the PE work, and therefore the 12F and the 9D are not required. The FTIP needs to be reviewed to verify the description of the work is consistent with what is being requested. The other components of FTIP also verify fund type, fiscal year, and amount. So you see that we are dealing with the 23-24 fiscal year, and we have $45,000, and it is for the PE phase. So our FTIP, this is what our FTIP is. So here's what the 3A looks like. We start filling it out. Starts with a date. The date is such that it is solely just for tracking purposes, such that, hey, I started filling this out and I went back and I remodified it, modify the date. So it helps you know which is your most current version. If somehow it gets rejected from the district, updating the date helps the district know which is the most current. The federal project number is assigned to the local agency from the district local assistant engineer. The prefix, so in this case, STPL, just helps identify the program that the project is funded from. The first four-digit number, in this case 7002, we call that a low code. It's a location code, and it is assigned, each agency is assigned a unique low code. The three-digit number in parentheses is a simple counter. As projects get created in our database, they'll just get the next number in sequence. Agency name, who's implementing this project. And this will be who we'll be executing our agreements with, and that's who will be being reimbursed. Caltrans district and congressional district are just identifiers as to where the project primarily is. If a project's in multiple legislative districts, you can use the MULT. And we'll want you to estimate the breakdown. If it's in multiple legislative districts, we would like you to give an estimate of the breakdown between the districts. At the end of the bottom of the form is a remarks section where you can put that information in. The project contact, title, email, phone number. You click on the phone number and automatically puts it into our standard or phone number thing. This is for who the district local assistance engineer needs to contact if they have any questions. This is the person that can answer these questions. Project title, location, and description of work. This all the project title is just a title that defines how the project. When people talk about projects, we say, "Hey, I'm working on the D Street rehabilitation." People tend to know what that means. But the project location, description of work, those have to be consistent with what is in the FTIP. If you're doing work outside the limits of the FTIP, they are not federally eligible. So this helps define. This defines where the work is and what the work is. You can be try to be reasonable about how you describe it. You know, if you're doing, we talked about doing shoulders and gutters and all these other things. You know, you can sometimes simplify it, but sometimes you do need to spell it out. Taking the language from the FTIP is never a bad thing to do, because that way you know you're consistent. Our functional classification. So we have our functional classification map. It's in D Street. Lo and behold, it's purple. Go to the legend. That's a major collector. If I was talking to you in person, I'd say, is this on the federal aid system? And I'd hope to see a lot of people go nodding their head saying, yes, it is on the federal aid system. So you go to major collector, and like I said, it's populated. Located on the state highway is not applicable, and the CRS map coordinates would have been pulled directly from the same maps. Why is that CRS map coordinates important? Because what it is that our maps are actually approved by FHWA, and they're actually approved by these different coordinate maps. And so the unit that maintains this actually has signed copies saying FHWA has blessed this, the grid, etc. So it helps, link back. ITS, that's Intelligent Transportation System, and that is not applicable. Project Oversight, who's delegated the authority to administer the project? In most cases, working with local agency, it is locally administered. And now, the estimated phase completion date, which ties into project end date. So, the period of performance is an FHWA metric, and the project end date is one of our critical dates that Caltrans monitors. The period of performance starts with the federal authorization and it ends with the project end date. No reimbursable costs may be incurred after the project end date. And the project end date is established with the initial authorization, and it will be updated with future authorizations. So the PED is established based on the phase being authorized. We're doing with PE right away. The project end date is established based on the anticipated construction advertisement date. When is this project being advertised? For construction, the project end date is established based on the board or council's acceptance of the completion of the construction contract, meaning the contractor is being released from the project. The PED, the project end date, is then established by adding 12 months to the estimated date of completing the phase for potential delays. So I talk about here. So the initial PED, the project For our PE project, the period of performance starts with the initial authorization. And the PED phase completion date is construction advertisement. This is the date the PED will be based on. 1 year is added to the construction advertisement date to establish the PED for the PE phase. Again, work that occurs beyond the PED is not eligible for reimbursement. And again, this only applies for our PE phase. When you go and authorize construction, we'll be updating that, and we'll be doing that this afternoon with a construction authorization example. So for our project, we have an estimated construction advertisement date of December 1st, 2025. Now, yes, I just kind of pull these dates out of a hat, but you have, if you project managers have their estimated date worked out, so 2025, but then the PED is December 1st, 2026. That 1 year is automatically added. So continuing on our form, so which phase is being authorized? We're going to authorize PE. And again, mention our one exception to the rule of needing authorization for being eligible for federal reimbursement, and that's at-risk PE. So I'm going to explain that now. So Section 1440 of the FAST Act, that was the prior Federal Authorization Act, authorizes FHWA to reimburse recipients and subrecipients, so the local agencies, subcontractors, for preliminary engineering costs incurred prior to project authorization, assuming the costs are eligible activities on eligible projects. This only applies to the PE phase. Planning, right-of-way construction are not eligible. When utilizing at-risk PE, the project must be included in a federally approved FTIP or FSTIP. If the project is eligible for at-risk, the agency may seek reimbursement back to the effective date of the FAST Act, which was October 1st, 2015, or the federal approval date of the FSTIP when the project was first programmed, whichever occurred later. And when referencing, when referencing the initial FSTIP or FTIP, the PE funds are not required to be programmed as federal funds. They may have been programmed initially as local funds, but at the time of authorization, utilizing the at-risk, the funds then must be shown as federally programmed. So other than the agency receiving an authorization for PE, all federal requirements must be met. Local agency must follow federal procedures in consultant and contract selection and procurement. They must submit an LAPM 9A, their disadvantaged business enterprise agreement and consultants. And to be eligible for indirect costs, the agency must receive an approved letter for indirect cost rate proposal, that's an ICRP, prior to billing for indirect costs. So when a request is submitted, you'll actually be submitting 2 copies of the FTIP. You'll submit when the project was originally programmed and the one today that shows where the funds are programmed with federal funds. So when an agency is seeking retroactive PE reimbursements, they must indicate so on the 3A. Right? And 3 additional pieces of information are required from the standard PE authorization. The first date PE was approved in the FSTIP. This establishes the earliest date of eligibility for retroactive reimbursement. the estimated costs under the section 1440 at risk. This is an estimate of expenditures that occurred during the period of at risk. And last, the estimated end date for at risk. If you're still in the PE phase, the at risk ends with the process of a PE authorization. But if the project goes all the way into the construction phase, the at risk would end when the project goes to construction advertisement. This cost and end date are only estimates. They don't have to be absolutely precise. So for our example of our project, at risk is not being utilized.
Peter, while we're still on the screen, we've had a couple questions about the ITS. And I just wanted to emphasize that the ITS is the intelligent transportation system. It's if you're doing signals and you're getting, you're dealing with signal timing, that would be an ITS project. It's those kind of that intelligence being built into your traffic management, maybe that kind of thing. So this project didn't include that, so Peter went by, but people were asking, how do you determine if it's at ITS? And it's an element of your project.
Yeah, typically if it's an ITS project, those are actually being identified typically during the FTIP adoption. And they're kind of like, there's two categories, minor versus major. Minor, like I said, Susie kind of brought forward, the processes of doing an ITS project for a minor are fairly simple. There is some specialized documentation that does need, but if you get into a major ITS, these are projects where we're doing intelligent systems like down in the urbanized areas, they're doing hot lanes, high occupancy toll lanes, where they have a toll lane that will have the costs adjusted based on congested, so they have congested pricing. And they're used, I know, throughout the Bay Area quite substantially. And so those are much more complicated. They do have other steps that are required. I'm not ready to get into the details because we can get into a whole lot of areas, and we definitely get ourselves off the schedule if we got into going into those. So you have more questions about ITS, and if you want some training into that, we do have a specialized unit that does that. So ask for it, and we might be able to help you get that type of training. Is there any more other questions in that area?
Not on the ITS. And I'm reading this question as we go here. Does receiving 100% approves stamp PS&E fall into the PE phase in the context of requesting these authorizations? I'm not sure I understand that question. Maybe that's Emmanuel. Maybe if you could retype that. And then Miguel answered, what is considered at-risk PE? I think you went over that really well, but maybe Miguel, if you still have specific questions after Peter's gone through that.
I'll explain a little bit more. It's called at risk because when the agency submits a authorization request, that brings our staff on board to help monitor the project to ensure and give them some guidance. If they start the work and utilize, they may not necessarily have engaged our Caltrans district local assistance engineers as early as they normally would. And therefore, if they start working and they don't quite follow the federal procedures, they may not be eligible for federal reimbursement, entirely. So that's why it's called at risk.
Okay, and I'm going to take a chance at trying to answer Emmanuel's question. I think he's asking what is included within the PE phase. And the PE phase goes through all the preliminary design and then environmental and then final design, getting up to maybe even doing a little bit of the research for right away. That is all within the PE phase. So if you're saying 100% approved stamped PS&E, yes, your final design would be included within the PE phase. This is different than the state phasing where you might break out the design and environmental separately. Within the federal program, the PE phase is preliminary design, environmental, and final design.
Correct. Yeah. So in terms of right away, they can do some initial mapping, that type of thing. Towards construction, they can actually utilize the PE phase to do advertisement. Any costs associated with advertising the project can be covered under the PE phase. Chapter 3 of the LAPM does address this a little, in a little bit. So it does talk about the PE phase. So I highly recommend that as a source to help answer any questions. Okay.
And there was just one other kind of specific question here. There's the city of Tehachapi Island has changed congressional districts, but the form doesn't show the correct district. And so they're wondering who to talk to. And I would say, talk to your DLAE. They'll bring it up to headquarters and work on getting that updated.
Yeah. I'll give you a little background. This is a very complicated form with actually going through a update. We have to go through our Caltrans forms unit, and they are not doing as quickly as we would like. We understand, yes, back in 2000 when the census was done, there was a redistricting done throughout. You're not the only one. The redistricting occurred throughout the entire state. And so there's numerous locations where it's incorrect. It is out of our hands, unfortunately. We're aware of that. We can get it corrected when we do the actual authorization to FHWA. And so you can, if that's an issue, write it in the remarks section. Okay. All right. I'm ready to move on. So when you do the authorization, when you click on that, this form creates a project funding section. It automatically creates this such that's under PE. If there were previous phases authorized, then you would need to click the appropriate box under project funding for that, and then it would automatically add previous funding. Well, you'll see what that looks like when we do the construction. There. So the first item to add is the federal fund type, and that's shown on our F-tip. And if you recall, it was STP block grant funds. The federal amount request will be automatically filled in based on the project funding. But now, what is the amount of federal funds that are programmed in the F-STIP for PE? This is the maximum allowable. So 45,000 was programmed, and that's what we're requesting. And that 45,000 is automatically updated. Next, we enter the local match. And one additional determination is the phase 100% federally participating. In this case, it's 100%. If there is work that it is defined, it's not federally eligible, that needs to be segregated out. And so it would be a little bit less. Next is the reimbursement ratio. This is automatically calculated based on the federal funding amount divided by the federal participating cost. So 72. And a critical piece of information that needs to be made in the authorization is pro rata versus lump sum. Federal regulations require federal share of eligible project costs to be established at the time of authorization as either pro rata with the agreement stating the federal share as specific percentage or by lump sum with the agreement stating that the federal funds are limited to a specific dollar amount, not to exceed the pro rata percentage. The decision of determining when to choose pro rata or lump sum must be made at the time of authorization and noted on the 3A. You may use a different method for each phase of a project. PE may be established as pro rata and construction established as lump sum. Construction engineering may also vary. For construction and construction engineering phase, the pro rata lump sum share may be adjusted before or shortly after contract award. These requests for award adjustments must be submitted to the district local assistance engineer within 90 days of contract award. And this adjustment may also allow for changing the methodology from pro rata to lump sum or vice versa. If you're not sure which method you should choose, the rule of thumb is this. If a I gave you the answer right there. If a project is funded at the maximum reimbursement rate, use pro rata or lump sum, does not matter. Either method will allow for maximizing the use of federal funds. If the project is underfunded, meaning the federal funds are not sufficient to reimburse the local agency at the maximum federal reimbursement rate, lump sum is recommended. And so here it is. The number one thing, never use pro rata for underfunded projects. To simplify the decision, use lump sum in all cases. It doesn't matter whether it's, at the maximum reimbursement rate or not. Let me show you some funding scenarios to help illustrate possible adjustments. Using this example, your project is funded with $75,000 of federal funds with a total participating cost of $90,000. The reimbursement ratio is 83.33%. The project by definition is underfunded, is below the maximum reimbursement rate. For a cost increase of $12,000, if no additional federal funds are added to the project, the reimbursement ratio will drop to 73.53%. If additional federal funds are available, the cost increase will be funded at the same reimbursement ratio, 88.33%. The total amount will then be $85,000 of federal funds. If the project has cost savings, the savings are applied at the same percentage. Now, I'm going to show you the advantage of using the designated lump sum. Like pro rata, if no additional federal funds are added to the project, the reimbursement ratio will drop to 73.53%. If additional federal funds are available, the cost increase may be funded at the maximum eligible reimbursement ratio of 88.53%. Therefore, the overall reimbursement ratio increases to 83.94%. If there are savings, the federal funding will be limited to the maximum reimbursement ratio of 88.53%. So let's summarize and compare the differences between pro rata and lump sum. First, for our cost increases, the pro rata and cost increases will be held at the established reimbursement ratio of 83.3%. For lump sum, the cost increase would be eligible to be funded at the maximum reimbursement ratio of 88.53%. For this simple example, by choosing lump sum over pro rata, the project is eligible for an additional $823 of federal funds. This seems like a small amount, but we're dealing with small dollar amounts, and the differences between the reimbursement ratio and the maximum reimbursement ratio is minimal. Take this out to, we're talking about millions of dollars. It can be, we're talking about real dollars. For cost decreases, where as pro rata, the cost decrease will be held at the established reimbursement ratio of 83.33. For a lump sum, the cost decrease will allow the reimbursement ratio to be increased up to the legal maximum percentage of 88.53%. At first, every dollar of savings will be non-federal funds until the maximum reimbursement ratio is obtained. The difference is over $4,000 of federal funds on the project by electing lump sum. So I hope you've come to understand that lump sum is the preferred method when your project is underfunded. Again, if the project is fully funded, it does not matter. But can you be sure that if there are any cost increase, additional federal funds will be available? By choosing lump sum in all cases, you will be able to maximize your federal participation. So back to our project, when you click on the field pro rata lump sum, you will get a warning about the use of pro rata for underfunded projects. And you click on it, and we will select lump sum. This last piece of information to be completed is toll credits, that little TC over on the left-hand side. Toll credits have been in existence since 2010 and remains a confusing topic. Under federal regulations, toll credits have been established as a means for local agencies to receive credit towards the non-federal matching share of federal aid projects. The use of toll credits does not generate additional federal funding. It is used to merely meet the non-federal match requirement. Toll credits may be applied to any phase as long as the phase has not been authorized. They may not be applied to phases that have previously authorized without toll credits. The project must be properly programmed in the FTIP and identify the use of toll credits. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment. Caltrans policy requires the federal participating amount of a toll credit project be established at 100%. Oops, I failed to click on these. This is an example of an FTIP listing from SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments, for a project utilizing toll credits. SCAG includes a note in the project description that states toll credits are to be applied to this ATP project. The PE phase has $893,000. Construction has $4,107,000 program. No local or other non-federal funds have been programmed to match the federal funds. So toll credits will not be used on this project, and the box remains unchecked. So based on the phase requesting authorization, the LAPM 3A, the form will identify the supporting documents to accompany the 3A when submitting the request to the district local assistant engineer. Items with a check, again, are required. Dots only if applicable. For federal requirements, a local agency must have a designated full-time public employee in responsible charge for each project. The role of the responsible charge is to ensure that the work delivered under contract is complete, accurate, and consistent with the terms, conditions, and specifications of the contract. The responsible charge must be employed directly by the local agency directly receiving the federal funds. A consultant cannot be designated as a responsible charge. The project contact person does not need to be the responsible charge. And lastly, at the bottom of the form is a remarks section. If necessary, additional information may be added in the remarks section to clarify the project. This may include multiple congressional districts, or in case the wrong districts are identified, identify non-participating costs, and any other pertinent information. And occasionally, an authorization request may be rejected due to a flaw in the request. And these are some of the common reasons. It's the F-tip, not enough program, wrong fund type, wrong phase, wrong fiscal year, no EPSP. That one is pretty much not an excuse anymore because all the MPOs have EPSP, or it's outside the 4-year window of the F-tip, F-stip. So I was talking about the 4 years, but there's a year that talks about future years beyond that. That is information only. And therefore, it has to be in one of those 4 years that we identify. DBE agreements, either the 9A or 9B, are not on file. Same with the ADA compliance, not on file. And last, not using current forms. Emphasize that our forms do get updated periodically, and they don't always occur, like you say, with an LPP. They could occur in the middle of the year. So being aware of office bulletin, because an office bulletin will be issued if a form is updated. If you may have done a previous project using a form, and you just take a copy of that form and bring it over to do your next project, again, the form may have been updated. All right.
And Peter, just while you're on this screen, I think it's important to remember that the 9B and the 9C are annual forms, that every agency who wants to use federal funds has to resubmit the 9B and C every year.
It's supposed to be submitted around July of the year for the upcoming year. So we're going into the 2025 federal fiscal year, starting in basically a week. That if a project was not authorized this fiscal year, did not get funded, it gets moved, they have to make sure, yes, those annual submittals are updated. The district should have those already, and they should be updating our database accordingly. But occasionally, sometimes those don't happen. And so it will delay an authorization request. All right. What questions do we have? Because we're going to go to lunch early if we don't have a lot of questions.
Sure. So one of them is, if we can't meet the Caltrans required NEPA clearance before an obligation deadline, or they're just saying we can't. Now we would like to try to use our obligated construction funds for PE to cover the cost for NEPA, I'm assuming. Would we be considered an at-risk project if we might not meet the scheduled obligation deadline? And I think this is really a question about a time extension deadline versus an at-risk, but maybe you could discuss that, Peter.
I'm looking at the question. Require NEPA clearance before obligation can't meet. Well, one, you will not be able to get a construction authorization until NEPA is completed. That's kind of answer that question there. Because you'll have to have your NEPA cleared before that's a required document as part of construction. So, so when you say you have an obligation deadline, I'm not quite sure what kind of deadline.
I'm guessing that's a CTC deadline. For instance, if it's a federalized CTC project, they may have a deadline for when they're supposed to get into construction, and they're going to need to, but their PE is taking too long, their environmental So
That's
pushing those deadlines, so you're gonna need to request an extension to those, if possible, to that obligation deadline, but that's different from an at-risk PE process.
yeah. So there is training out there about critical dates, time use funds. I believe it's a copy of this training is the critical dates training is available through the LTAP website. So if you want to learn more about time use of funds, that would be a place to go. But the key thing here is that, yes, you have to have the NEPA cleared before you can go to construction.
Okay, and the next question, would a CRP be listed under CMAQ?
What's the CRP? I'm not sure what that is.
I'm not sure, and unfortunately, since I'm from a rural district, we don't have any CMAQ projects. So
There is, I think there is that the carbon reduction program, that CRP?
oh, maybe, yeah.
That might be, well, simplifying it, they're two separate programs. So, there, if you're talking about funding, if I'm interpreting that correctly, they're two different funding programs. And so
Okay.
no, it would not be listed under CMAQ.
Great. Okay. How do you know if toll credits are available for your agency?
As I pointed out, it has to be identified in the FTIP.
And I think if there's every agency, it's not an agency decision. It's toll credits are available statewide, depending on the type of project and, you know, that kind of thing. It's not, I don't think there's specific agencies that are eliminated from the toll program
At one time, it was pretty much free flowing. Toll credits are now starting to become a limited resource. So we are starting to develop some toll credit policies that have not been implemented yet, but it's between you and your MPO to identify, to try to get toll credits. On the state side, it would be with the state program. So bridge projects, for example, bridge projects off the federal aid system have traditionally been funded 100% with toll credits. On the federal aid system, we're standard 88.53. So there has been cases where we've, just automatically applied toll credits. So, but it is definitely identified in the FTIP.
And but it's based more on the program and other considerations, not because of your agency itself. I want to also make a comment to please use the question and answer screen in Zoom to ask your questions and to talk. I see some things are being put in the chat still. The chat is a great place if you're just wanting to ask general questions to the technical to the training itself. And so in that chat, though, it did say that it is the carbon reduction program, and they're saying that they don't see that carbon reduction is not listed yet in the authorization form. So again, that authorization form update, especially with these newer programs, it might take a little while. So you'll want
and actually what you can do is you can select a program, and then you can go back to click on the field and actually erase it and type in a new name. So the form actually does allow you to do that.
Yes, great. The next question is, what is financial calendar for Caltrans? And I'm thinking they mean fiscal year, maybe?
Yeah, that's a very vague question. We do work on a federal fiscal year, which means the federal fiscal year ends September 30th. To get projects, so I just see they put it, when should it be submitted? So if you want to get in for this.
I'm sorry, Peter, that's the next question. I already.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry. So to get funded this fiscal year, yes, you need to get your authorization request in. And I'm going to talk again this afternoon. I'm going to talk about obligation authority apportionments and very detailed.
Okay, and so this
So
next,
yeah. So I really don't. There's no calendar other than we have to meet. Get our obligation authority approved done by September 30th.
and it takes a while. It might take 6 weeks, so that usually the deadline for an agency to submit their authorization request is earlier.
Yes,
Um, you
we
can't submit it on September 30th and have that count. It has
nope.
to be approved by FHWA by September 30th. Okay, so then the next question is, who submits the EPSP and who approves it? And how long does it take to get approved? And when should it be submitted?
Again, that is basically on from the 2023 FSTIP. That was documented in all 18 MPOs. I was doing some research for something else I'm working on, and I actually researched it. All 18 MPOs, and the plus Caltrans, we all have delegated EPSP. It has been documented. So it is approved statewide for every project. So there's nothing you need to do really. And so it's already approved. So it doesn't take any time at all. It's just you submit. Let's say, let's just jump in the future. We're in October. So we're in the 24-25 fiscal year. And you got a project program in the 25-26, you can authorize it as soon as you would like to. There's no waiting.
Okay. And again, just that process, it's something you'll want to talk to your district local assistance engineer when you're talking about advancing a project using the EPSP, just to make sure you've got everything going on there. The last question I have here is clarification about the forms 9A and 9B. So the 9A is a one and done form unless they do a major update to the form itself. So the 9A is not an annual form. It's basically a verification that your agency agrees to abide by the Disadvantaged Business Administration rules for federal funding. The 9B is an annual form that indicates who is your disadvantaged business contact, and you have to update that once a year. We do want those in the summer so that they can be reviewed and approved before the next federal fiscal year starts on October 1st. And it's effective for all the projects that you authorize for that federal fiscal year. So it's not a project specific form.
And then you need to be in place before any authorization request that occurs.
Correct.
Now, if you don't have any projects to be authorized, you don't have to update it, but it's probably good practice to do that. Like I said, because something could happen and a project gets advanced, and then we don't want to delay it. So,
and we've seen issues where a small agency might be planning on only using state funding and no federal funding. And then last minute costs change, something happens, and they get a project federalized, in which case they need to run around wildly and take care of all these federal forms to become eligible. So it's a simple form to do, and it's worth doing every year, just to make sure that you are eligible for federal funding if you need it.